Morning, class. I'm going to spend just a few minutes getting you, I guess I could say, ready for the first quiz we're going to have in this macroeconomics class. And as I always do, try to put together a video that at least highlights what I think are some of the salient, some of the really important concepts that you'll need in order to not only do well as we work forward in the macro class, but also to do well on the quiz. And the first quiz is going to cover chapters 1 and 2. And if you have taken a micro class with me in the past, you'll see some really similar concepts between, say, the first one, two, three, maybe four chapters in that microeconomics textbook. And when you compare them with the first one or two or three or four chapters in this macroeconomics textbook, because they are both published by Flat World Publishing, and both books have the same authors. So don't be surprised if you took a micro class with me, maybe in the fall semester, or if you took some in, over winter term, you'll recognize the similarities. But to jump into this first review of the first two chapters, I want to just stop and make sure everybody understands that we're talking about macroeconomics. And if you go back to ancient Greek, you're talking about, when you talk about microeconomics, well, micro means small in ancient Greek, and macro means large or long in ancient Greek. So that's kind of the differentiation when we're talking about just the linguistics of the names microeconomics and macroeconomics. But there are some definite distinctions between the two, and we'll get into them, and you'll start picking those out as we go forward in the macro class. But go back to your old micro classes, whether you took them with me or with somebody else. A lot of that, you were studying utility, and you were studying individual decisions and choices, theory of the firm, production decisions, things of those natures. And in macro, you're getting more into the bigger picture. So micro is more the smaller picture of economics, and macro more of a larger picture. And we'll get into it, as I said, as we go through the text, where we're talking about GDP, we're talking about unemployment, we're talking about inflation, talking about monetary policy, fiscal policy, expansion, recession, business cycles, a lot of things like that. So you'll start to see the differentiation as we move forward. But just to start, just in this quiz one, let's just think about economics in general. So economics is a social science. And there are, I don't know, several, depending on how you define them, but there are several social sciences. You've got anthropology, archaeology, political science, psychology, history, geography. I think sociology is thrown in there. And most of your social sciences study human behavior or choice. Those are the kind of differentiators that set them aside from some of your hard sciences. And if you take one step farther down, kind of down the rabbit hole, economics sets itself apart because as economists, we are studying choices among alternatives. And there are basically three pillars of economic thought. Number one is opportunity cost. And you will hear that, whether it's in a micro class or this macro class, you will hear it time and time again. Economics studies one opportunity cost is, what is the next best choice for resources, for, finances, decision-making process. But firms, economies, economic systems, global economies, nationwide economies, even regional economies, they're all looking at it's based on the concept of opportunity cost. Secondarily, we're talking about self-interest, optimization. Most of my time as a professional has been spent in the healthcare arena. And I've worked on both the provider side of the house and the payer side of the house. So on the payer side of the house, on health plans, it's definitely self-interest. They are trying to maximize the number of members that they can enroll in the health plan. They're trying to maximize revenue coming in the door from, based on the number of members and what the premiums that they're charging for healthcare coverage. So they're trying to maximize revenues. On the flip side of it, they're trying to minimize costs because for health plans to generate a profit, and you go back to maybe your accounting or even your old micro class, profit is nothing more than revenue minus cost. And so if you're maximizing that revenue and you're minimizing costs, you're going to more than likely maximize your profits. If you look at the provider side of the house, similar type concept. They're trying to maximize revenues too. They're trying to maximize the fees that they receive for providing healthcare goods and services to a health plan's members by negotiating, very financially viable contracts, at least on the provider side of the house. They're also trying to minimize that cost segment of it. They're trying to minimize the amount of rent they're paying for their office, the cost of the I call the capital stock that they have, trying to minimize the cost of the labor that they hire. Because again, healthcare providers are in, they went to medical school for one reason. That's to maximize their income potential. So they're trying to maximize that income potential, and they do it through maximizing profits, just like any financially based, financially driven firm is going to do. They're going to be in the business of maximizing profits. And then lastly, on the pillars, you're talking about choices at the margin. Everybody makes marginal choices. You go into, I'll just take a student as an example. You're maximizing your choices. You are having to decide on a daily basis where when you get up in the morning or you're going to go to class. That's your choice. You're maximizing at the margin. Margin, I'd rather lay in bed and sleep an extra 2 or 3 hours, or I'm going to have to get up and go to class. You're maximizing tonight. Maybe you're in a fraternity or sorority, and you're trying to figure out, I've got this quiz tomorrow, but I've got this big fraternity party I could be going to, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and going to be a huge party, first to school, and it's going to just be a great time. But so I'm making that choice at the margin. Do I go to the fraternity party, or do I end up staying home and staying in the dorm and studying? So, and likewise, when you go, if you're a coffee drinker, and most students like Starbucks for whatever reason, I don't drink coffee, so it's not that big a deal for me. But at the margin, they are making decisions on, do I go to Starbucks for a cup of coffee, or do I swing into Dunkin' Donuts, or I guess McDonald's sells coffee. There's a lot of restaurants, these fast food chains that sells coffee. So you're making decisions at the margin. Likewise, when you get into, let's say you decide you're going to go to McDonald's for your coffee. You go into McDonald's, and you're going to also make, if you're going to get something to eat, you may be making marginal decisions there too, because you can buy the cup of coffee, you can buy a breakfast sandwich, you can buy maybe a pastry or something, and you can buy them individually for X number of dollars, but you can also save money by buying a meal, isn't it? So it gets coffee and a sandwich and maybe some kind of a potato product with it. So you're making these decisions at the margin. And so this is what these three pillars are the pillars that differentiate economic thought from other social sciences and the way that other professionals go about their work in social sciences. And also, economists are continually talking about scarcity. And, a scarce good is one that's excludable. When I say it's excludable, it means that you can exclude others from using it at the same time that you're using it. A scarce good has other alternatives. Some economists describe a scarce good as any good in which the demand for that good is greater than the availability of the good. Other economists will say, well, a scarce good is something that can be used for only one option or one, process at a time. So it's not like it can be used at the same time for different processes at the same time. In other words, a resource has one purpose. What is the purpose of the resource? And also, when we're talking about scarcity, you hear everybody talk about unlimited wants and limited resources. You hear, economists talk about more is preferred to less. Again, basic tenets of economic thought, and then it's especially decides, from a scarcity point, how you're going to make those choices when it comes to scarcity. We also talk about in an economic thought, and especially when we're talking about theory of the firm, we're talking about factors of production. And your factors of production, the big three that most people talk about are labor, capital stock, natural resources. And natural resources, the one that most people always talk about is land. So you'll hear economists talk about land, labor, capital as the big three. You've also got technology, and it's not so much technology in the way maybe you think about it as a consumer, where you're buying an iPad or a computer, or an iPhone, or some kind of mobile device that you use. That it's kind of like most students, whatever the mobile device is, it's almost like an appendage on the end of their arm. But that's one concept of technology. But from an economic or an economist perspective, you're talking about technology of a production process. You're talking about the technology that's enclosed in that black box, and inputs are coming in one end of the black box and outputs coming out the other end of the black box. Economists, for the most part, aren't as concerned about what's in that black box as they are about the efficiency and the comparative advantage and the competitive nature of a production firm that can take inputs and transform them into outputs. And then lastly, when we're talking about factors of production, we're also throwing in entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, it's, basically there are individuals that are trying to change production processes, trying to make production processes more efficient, trying to bring new processes to market, new ideas to market, new concepts to market in return for profit. Again, entrepreneurships are definitely driven by profit, just like firms are driven by profit. Go back to that second pillar of economic thought. We're talking about self-interest. Entrepreneurs are embedded in self-interest. And then we want to talk, a few minutes about in chapter 1 and 2, we talk about an economy or an economic system. In an economy, it's basically an organization that produces or makes production decisions and makes decisions on how what is produced is allocated. And if you think about economic systems, economists break them into, you've got what they call command socialist economies. Those are economies where the government, and think about, I don't know, North Korea, Cuba, maybe Venezuela. The government owns everything. The government owns the resources. They own the decision-making processes. They are going to determine how it's allocated. And so that's on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of that economic system spectrum, you've got what's considered, or you hear some people talk about market capitalist economies. United States, Singapore, UK. That is determined or defined as minimal government intervention. Firms or individuals own the resources, they own the production processes. They are going to let the capitalistic market determine not only what to produce, how to produce it, how it's allocated. You get some government intervention, but it's pretty minimal. And then you've got these hybrid kind of economies, in between, kind of the in between. You've got like Sweden, France, Germany, closer to the market capitalist economy, but they still have a more government intervention than that we see here in the United States or in the United Kingdom or in Britain, or however you want to define the UK. And then also down on the other end of the spectrum, you've got China and Russia that at one point were, command socialist economies without a doubt, but they've kind of moved. They're trying to move more toward the middle, more toward a hybrid situation, but the going's a little slow on that. And what happens in these, when you're talking about an economy, therefore decisions have to be made. What's going to be produced? How's it going to produce it? How's it going to be allocated, or for whom are we producing the good or service? And then lastly, there is kind of the save or the preservation for the future, because when you're talking about resources and resource availability and profitability drives, at least in a capitalist market economy, it's going to drive these decisions. And what happens is you don't want to use all your resources now. You want to save some, allocate some for the future so that you can continue to grow your production process. So when we get to the why, we're talking, or when we get to the what is produced, we're talking at that point about scarcity and trade-offs and those type concepts. When we talk about how, we're talking about, automation. Is it manual processed? If you think of countries like on the continent of Africa, maybe in China, places like a lot of the Far East, when we're talking about that, China, and you've got Mongolia and some of these stands, you've got a group of countries that, the name ends in stand. A lot of those economies are driven by manual processes. And that was an issue when COVID hit, that economists, not only in the United States, but in other countries, are concerned about what the death toll during COVID is going to, what impact it's going to have on this manual labor process. And when it comes to the how part of it, they probably see these countries shifting over time to more of an automated process. Where here in the United States, we automate everything as much as possible because it's a more efficient way of producing goods and services. And then for whom it's how's it allocated? Who gets these goods or services? In the United States, most of it is driven by it's again capitalist market. Price drives it, right? Price, all other things equal, price drives everything. You're going to have some government intervention, and I'll go back to the healthcare example. You'll have some government intervention when it comes to ensuring that there is equality in the allocation of healthcare. So government has programs. You have Medicaid programs, you have VA, you have TRICARE for the military, you have Medicare for the aged population, and the government's trying to ensure that the commercial marketplace for healthcare doesn't siphon off all of the goods and services, because you want some equity and some equality, because a lot of these, especially Medicaid and the senior population, may not have the financial viability to go out and compete on a commercial side of the house. So they want to ensure that government's going to play in the marketplace, because they want to ensure that healthcare goods and services are equally divided. And you see this in a lot of, when it comes to a lot of goods and services that are provided here in the United States. And lastly, when we're talking about factors of production, I always kind of throw this in. I think it's Einstein that said, you can't make matter out of nothing. And that goes back to your factors of production. You've got to have some factors of production, or you're not going to be able to generate assets or goods or services. Let's see what else we need to talk about. The one thing when it comes to the government and the government involvement, when it comes to the how, the what, the for whom, and the preservation for the future, one of the things that government involvement, and again, we take healthcare as an example, government can get involved in the planning process, the production process, and the distribution process. And that's what you see with healthcare goods and services, especially in the Medicaid program or the Medicare program. And go back to I want to make a couple of clarifying comments when we're talking about the factors of production. And some of these students get a little, I don't want to say a little confused, but get a little twisted with their understanding of some of the concepts. But when you're talking about it, we'll just take them one at a time. When you're talking about labor, you've got basically, in most countries, you can break labor into either skilled or unskilled. And if you're running a shortage of labor, there's a couple of ways that you can increase that shortage or assist that shortage of labor in disappearing. Is you can bring in more workers. You can relax immigration standards. I mean, look what's happening at the southern border. I mean, we've got thousands of individuals flowing across that southern border, and maybe the government thinks that those individuals flowing across that southern border are going to be great when it comes to maybe easing some of the issues that they potentially see in the labor force. When, again, I'll go back to healthcare. A lot of these individuals coming across that southern border, they're not going to benefit me if I'm working for a health plan, or if I'm working for a provider or a payer or a provider group, because they're going to be unskilled. For the most part, they're unskilled workers. Now, they may do a great job if there are a lot of unskilled labor jobs available. But if you're talking about skilled labor jobs, I'm not sure how many of these individuals coming across the southern border are going to be able to help on in the skilled labor market. Another way to increase the labor supply is to raise the retirement age. Maybe you raise that retirement age to, I don't know, 68 or 70. I mean, or you can bring a lot of senior citizens, and you see it now with inflation running rapid and the economy, to me, going in the wrong direction. You've got a lot of seniors that are going back into the workplace. They have to. Their Social Security and their government benefits aren't enough to sustain even the necessities that they need. So you see a lot of them going back in the workplace. You see them running cash registers at McDonald's. Went into Home Depot the other day, and there were just a lot of older individuals in Home Depot that were helping customers. So that's one way to increase the labor. Another way to increase, especially the efficiency of labor, is through training and education. Most health plans, and I think a lot of companies in general, have a tuition reimbursement program that they help individuals that would like to get a college degree or would like to get a graduate degree. And when you're helping, skilled laborers or improving the skill set of those laborers, you're talking about, from an economic perspective, you're talking about improving human capital. And so that's one way to improve the workforce. When you're talking about capital stock, I want to make sure that you understand capital stock is different than financial capital. Financial capital, we typically talk about stocks, bonds, CDs, checking accounts, paper money, metal currency. But capital stock, or you hear economists talk about economic capital, has to be two things. It has to have been produced, and you have to turn around, and it has to be used to produce other goods and services. So capital stock, you're talking about machinery, you're talking about trucks, you're talking about bulldozers, you're talking about farm equipment. If you went into Starbucks this morning, you're talking about the cash register that they had, because you're talking about the little coffee, whatever you call those coffee machines that fixes your little woo-woo coffee drinks, and your little heats the milk and puts it in your coffee drink. All of those are considered capital stock that Starbucks has either leased or has purchased outright, and they're going to use that capital stock to generate goods and services. Cups of coffee, cups of tea, the breakfast sandwich you get, because they have put it in a microwave. There's just a lot of capital stock there. So that's what differentiates capital stocks from financial capital. And then you've got land. That is a natural resource. Natural resources are found in nature. Natural gas, oil makes gasoline, but land is your main um, natural resource when it comes to factors of production. And so it goes back to the buildings on campus, on a college campus. They are built on land, and you've got, the building that Starbucks has. A lot of college campuses, they can't expand, so they're pretty much constrained by the number of students they can bring on campus. And that's why you see a lot of colleges going to online type curriculums, because you don't necessarily, they can use the land that they currently have more efficiently. And then we're talking about technology. We talked about that a few minutes ago, but it's the black box. It's the technological process, production process, or the production function that turns inputs and outputs. And then entrepreneurs, they're trying to change processes or to make things more efficient, or trying to bring products to market in order to maximize profitability for themselves. When we talk about a capitalistic society, I always throw out Joseph Schumpeter, Austrian economist, and he created a catchphrase that you should hear a lot, especially if you're taking some entrepreneurial classes. You're talking about creative destruction. And basically, Schumpeter was, always talked about, out with the old, in with the new, increasing efficiency, automation. You think about the involvement of the computer. You think about the first computer was humongous, and now it's, you can actually do computing type activities on your cell phone. So that's what we're talking about, creative destruction, talking about innovation, talking about technological change. So always remember, you've got Schumpeter, that again, Austrian economist, kind of the father of that creative destruction. Another individual that I reference quite a bit is Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. He's the first one to talk about specialization, because everybody specializes. Everybody specializes because it goes back to the three pillars of economic thought: opportunity cost, self-interest, choices at the margin. And those three pillars drive everybody to specialize. And Adam Smith had this concept of the invisible hand, and you'll hear economists talk about Adam Smith's invisible hand, because Adam Smith's contention was that market forces will eventually drive supply and demand to equilibrium. And again, he talks about market forces move, not only supply and demand, to move markets toward equilibrium. Market forces drive specialization. And then the last thing I want to touch on as we go through this review for quiz number one, I want to talk about the production possibilities curve. And again, we've talked about it, I don't want to say ad nauseum, but it is a significant aspect of, especially on the microeconomic side, and you'll get into it some on the macro side. And the three drivers of the production possibilities curve, it's the factors of production, again, land, labor, capital stock, especially technology, entrepreneurship, they are all fixed. So the factors of production are fixed. You can't change them. The factors of production are fully employed. In other words, you're employing all of your factors of production in the most efficient way in the production process. So fixed factors of production, fully employed, used most efficiently. And when you're talking about the production possibilities curve, or I'd refer to it as the PPC, it's a combination of two goods and services. And as you look at it, it's concave from the origin, right? Bowed out, and it takes into consideration opportunity cost. It takes into consideration scarcity, and especially as you move along that production possibilities curve, you're taking into consideration, scarcity and opportunity cost. If you're on that production possibilities curve, if you're producing on it, then it does mean that you are have all your factors fully employed and you're using them in the most efficient process. If you are producing at a point that's inside that production possibilities curve, you are not efficiently utilizing your resources in the production process and you're not fully employing those scarce factors of production or your resources. And for points outside that production possibilities curve, you cannot reach them. They're unattainable because your factors of production are fixed. Now, as we move along in our macro studies, we will find out that through economic growth, you can take and you can expand that production possibilities curve out. Because in the short run, and again, go back to your micro classes, in the short run, all of your factors of production are fixed except one. In the long run, all your factors of production are variable. They can all vary because of the timeline. And typically in the short run, the one factor of production that most economists vary and most companies in general vary is labor. It's easier to vary the level of labor. Easier than trying to vary your capital stock, easier than trying to vary, land. So usually when we're talking about short run decisions, it's impacting the labor. Is that, and we went over that multiple times when we were in the micro class. And see, is there anything else? It's the scarcity of resources that has the negative slope on the production possibilities curve. And as you move along the production possibilities curve, then you're starting to play with the opportunity cost. You're working with opportunity costs. Again, remember, production possibilities curves, you've only got two goods or services. One's going to be plotted on the vertical, one's going to be plotted on the horizontal. One last thing that I want to touch base on just quickly is some students, and it comes up in I think it was chapter 2, when we're talking about comparative advantage. When we're talking about a company's comparative advantage, we're talking about lowering opportunity cost to gain advantage against or leverage against our competitors. And basically a company, a global economy, the regional economy, a national economy that has a comparative advantage, it means that they are producing at lower opportunity costs than their competitors. So that's comparative advantage. If you take any leadership classes, strategic, management classes, you're going to hear the authors in those textbooks talk about competitive advantage. And they will talk about competitive advantage that you can, make goods or services cheaper, you can make them better, you can make them higher quality. And you're doing that because you're trying to outperform your competitors. And in a lot of these leadership strategic management classes, they talk about mission, vision, and culture is driving competitive advantage. So just kind of think about that as we kind of move forward. There is a difference, even though comparative and competitive tend to overlap some, you tend to see them brought forth in different areas of study, depending on which area of study you're looking at. And I think that is it on our review of quiz number 1. And as I put the quizzes out there, I'll continue to do videos or review videos, and I'll continue to post, and I will post them as I post you access to the quizzes. Thanks for joining.